What changed? What changed that year? I mean, as a guy that, you had been very good to that point, but there's a change, you're significantly faster your senior season. What was different?
Grew a little bit, got a little bit stronger. Things just came together, didn't get sick. Getting sick's a big deal when you swim because you lose some time working out and that kind of thing. So I just got really lucky.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it was more than luck. Before we arrive at some of these races, you and I had a chance to talk on the phone a little bit about Peter Daly, and to kind of set the scene for that 200 freestyle final your senior year. So we talked about you were a 50 freestyler to that point. In your senior year, you make a move to the 200. And this is a big move for people that don't know, kind of the history, because what you were moving into was an event that had been won by Peter Daly the previous 2 seasons, in the 70 and 71 season. And he had broken the state record and become the first swimmer ever under 147 in the state of Michigan. I think he had been 146.8 in 71, and I think 47.1 as a sophomore. So he was very fast. Probably you guys were in the same class together, the class of 72. And so your sophomore year, he won the 200. In your junior year, he won the 200. And he was very well established at that time. So for you to make a move into that event, there was an established figure there. And to give a little bit of background, you broke Peter's state record, and in the process shaved 1.8 seconds off of that record, I believe. You went 1:45.19 and touched Peter out by 4/100ths of a second to win that state championship and establish that new state record. Made yourself the first Michigan boy ever under 146. A lot of cool history there. What do you remember about that race? Can you take us back to that and what you remember?
Yeah, well, going into state meet, you are limited on the number of events that you can swim. I like the 50. I love swimming fast. My coach had other ideas. He said, I'm putting you in the 200. I knew I had a really good 200. I had great times all season long in the event. And the year before, I watched Peter do his thing where he would kind of coast the first 6 lengths and then blow everybody away on the last 50. He did it to Foster, he did it to everybody. And I was maybe 3 feet from him on the edge of the pool watching him do it. So I knew what to expect, and my coach told me what to expect. And it was a good race. When I swam, I usually didn't see anybody next to me just because that's just the way the water is. But I can tell if it's a close race, or could tell that it's a close race by the sound of the crowd. And it just got louder and louder and louder towards the end. And I just, as a result, I knew what he was doing. So I just pushed it harder and harder and harder and did touch him out. It was a very good race. He was a very tough competitor.
That's great. You paint a great picture. And again, for swimmers that are unfamiliar with the era, you're not wearing goggles in this race, right? So some of the sensory, things that, current swimmers may be tapping into, when you're describing picking up the race by the sound, that's real, that you may not have been as aware of where everybody was as a swimmer might be today.
Right. It was a roar. It was just a roar. It was a great place to swim from that perspective because the crowd definitely fit into the race.
Yeah. I want to share my screen here for just a moment and show anybody who might be watching this why this was such a special race for anybody that can see this. So as you see there, Bruce went 1:45.19 and Peter went 1:45.2. But one of the things that I want to point out, and something that I talked with you on the phone a couple of days ago, I mean, boy, this really is one of the great races in the history of the state of Michigan. And I've done the research to be able to say that. The top 4 swimmers in this race are all uniquely legendary in their own right. You know, obviously you and I are speaking right now, and you've established your place in history for not only this race, but the 100 freestyle that we're going to talk about in a second, which really might have been even better. And of course, Peter was a state record holder and a 2-time state champion in this race, and also an outstanding butterflyer as well. But the swimmers that took 3rd and 4th in this race, I've already introduced people that follow this project to Paul Foster and Dan Stephenson. Paul Foster, when he came through, was the greatest backstroker in the history of the state of Michigan, and he established records that would stand for 6 years in the backstroke. I'm sorry, I think 4 years in the backstroke, and he went on and swam at Michigan. And of course, young Dan Stephenson, the son of the mayor of Ann Arbor and just a freshman at that time, went 147.3. He, of course, would go on to go 141.3 3 years later to reestablish the state record. But to have 4 swimmers that I think by nearly any measure, you know, are among some of the best swimmers in the history of the state, even 48 years later, the really cool thing, and I know you might not have identified Dan since he was such a young guy at that time of what he was going to do, but Foster was well established and Daly was well established and you were established at this time. There were some heavy hitters in this race. I mean, did you feel going into this race, this is pretty big?
Oh yeah, my senior year I lost twice, once to Tommy Holt in the 50 and once to Foster in the 200 in a dual meet. So yeah, I knew everybody in the race had great capabilities, definitely.
This 72 year was really, really good.
Yeah, it was a good year, and there's been a lot of good years since. Holt swam for Grosse Pointe though. Grosse
Pointe, I'm sorry, thanks for keeping me honest there.
Yeah, yeah, I think he won the 52 or 3 years, so he was a good sprinter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was just a lot of good competition out there. It was, you know, it was tough.
I'm curious, you know, obviously that 200 sets the stage for the 100, and I'm interested in hearing kind of how you came out of the 200 to get ready for the 100. I would imagine your confidence was sky high going into that 100 freestyle race. Is that the case? I mean, did that really set the stage for your 100 of, if I could do that, what can I do now?
Well, it was definitely helpful, right? But I mean, 2 years before I came in almost last, so stuff happens. And like I said, Matman Pool was a trap. If you didn't know the blocks were slippery, you'd slip off them on your start. If you didn't know it was dark, you would miss your turns. So, I mean, things happen, and I didn't want to get overconfident about it, but I knew I had, you know, a really good 100 free. I've been kept lowering my time from the summertime straight through the season almost. So, yeah, I was confident, but not overconfident.
And I'm sure that was a big part of why you executed the race well. So you pointed out to me, and I appreciated this, that you know, that 100 freestyle record, it stood for 5 seasons from 66 until 71, and it had been broken the year before your junior year and lowered below 49 to 48.9, which was, you know, the first time that any Michigan boy had ever been under 49. So this is really why I want to set the scene for this race, again, for, you know, anybody that might be watching this, to really understand how special your 100 freestyle was in that season. So you win that race in 47.17, shaved 1.7 seconds, over 1.7 seconds off the state record in a 100 freestyle, which is really, really impressive. And you really put it together, and you won that race by, I was just looking, the second place time was 48.9 as well. So the second place finisher was right at the existing state record. You must have been well close to a body length, if not more, ahead of the competition, and really ahead of any 100 freestyler in the history of the state. again, you know, kind of similar question to what I asked you about the 200. Can you take me back to your memories of that 100 and how you put it together?
Yeah, Coach Hike was pretty big on negative splitting back then. So I would try to take it out and bring it back at a pretty similar speed, not take it out too fast. And so that's what I did. And it was just, it was just amazing. The roar of the crowd when I finished. My head came out of the water and I saw the whole place jumping up and down at the same time. It was just the greatest feeling in the world. And after the race, my mentor from Groves, John Wick, who was my coach a great deal of the time, walked by, and I think he was talking to Gus Stater at the time, and he said, you know, his time would have won the Big Ten championship this year. So it was really cool.
You knew it was special right away, obviously. Well, we don't have to take your word for it. Again, I want to share my screen here and kind of show you exactly what Bruce was just talking about. So you can see in the first column there, he's only a 1/10 of a second ahead of Mark Colville at the 50 turn. Both of them turned in roughly 23.0. But you see Bruce brings it home in 24.1 to finish in 47.17. No knock on Colville, again, you know, one of the best 100 frees in the history of the state at that time. But he came home in 25.8, which means that you were a full 1.7 seconds faster in the second 50 than anybody else in the pool. That's remarkable, you know, race execution, you know, for you, that you did exactly what you wanted to do. You know, you talk about how your coach kind of prioritized that as a style, you know, but those things don't happen on accident. That takes a lot of practice, right? You know, like to execute at the state meet in that setting. I imagine you spent a lot of time really working on being great on that back half.
Right, we worked on that all season long. He was watching the Dearborn guys do that. Norm Summation would do that in his 400. And it was kind of the thing right that season to try to negative split. And so I would work on that pretty much every meet. And it's hard to do in 100 because you want to do like Mark did. And Mark was a friend of mine. We swam summer times together. And he, you know, we both like to sprint. And when you're a sprinter, you want to go as fast as you can all the time. You don't want to hold back anything. So, but it worked, you know, it worked very well.
Did you have any regrets, you know, as a guy that loved to swim fast? Did you have a chance that year to ever swim the 50 and get a feel for what you would have been? Or was that just kind of like you were kind of left to wonder how fast you could have been that day had you had a chance to do that race?
I think my best time that year was 22.3 as I look back through the scrapbook, which was still, I think, second in the state when they did final rankings on every event.
I want to share one more thing here and show you something that I've been working on. So this is a stack here of some of the greatest 100 freestylers in the history of the state of Michigan. And, you know, these are really, really difficult to stack guys up when you're talking about, you know, hundredths of a second and, you know, obviously different eras. But in the 75 years that I've monitored and gone through these results, you know, you're one of, I think, probably less than 10 guys in the history of the state of Michigan that have finished in the top 5 in the country in the 100 freestyle. That year, you finished 5th in the final NISCA rankings and going 47.17. And you can see in that NISCA record column, Bruce's record stood until 1975 when John Newton came along and lowered it a little bit, but it wasn't a record. Whereas your 200 record, I think, might have got clipped the following year by Norman that you just mentioned at Dearborn. This 100 freestyle record had some staying power. And like you said, you know, you probably knew it was a little bit more of a special swim and that it would have won Big Tens that year. And I think that really speaks to how good you were. And, you know, you also see there in the notes column that you had a chance later on that summer to swim in Olympic trials. How was that experience for you?
It was a great experience going there, but, you know, gosh, how do I put this? Didn't really have excellent pool time going up to it. My focus was weightlifting because I didn't have pool time. I'd ride over to Andover 5 miles on my bicycle and swim on the weekends. But for some reason, the Birmingham Swim Club and around there, they just weren't swimming. So I didn't have pool time. So I wasn't able to prepare for it. So from a timing perspective, I did, I think, a 55-1 there, and I did not do well. But it was great to go and watch just all these top-notch swimmers swim. I remember seeing Rick Dumont swim. He was 16 years old, coming in first in the mile. Just stuff like that. It was just fantastic to see it.
Did Spitz make an impression on you that year? Did you get an opportunity to kind of see him up close?
Well, yeah. I mean, Spitz was, he just had this aura. I'm not kidding you. Just this light glistening around him from, I don't know what, but he was an amazing swimmer.
Was that Santa Monica tan? I think that's what it was.
Something he was putting on. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Recruiting and college commitments happened in a much different time frame at that time. And, whereas now, you have a lot of high school swimmers that don't even get into the water their junior year before they've already committed to a program and made their decision about where they're going to go. And many of the guys that I've talked to in your era didn't know where they were going while they were swimming their senior year. I'm curious how your recruitment went and how you arrived to be a Michigan State Spartan.
Yeah, well, thinking back on it, there were a few Spartans that came to the house when, after the season was over, when the recruiting period started. Bill Hall, John Thurr, and Ken Winfield, all excellent swimmers, came to the house and said hello, and they had their Michigan State swimming T-shirts on. We talked for a while, and real nice guys. And Gus Stager had me go to U of M and talk to some of the folks there and look around. And Coach Fetters brought me to a Michigan State football game, my dad and I, and it was really neat. It was very, very difficult to decide because I hadn't really thought much about it at all when I was swimming, where I would go. I mean, whether I would win was totally up in the air, and all that is very dependent. Whereas, like Tom Zuba, who had been winning events since he was in ninth grade, probably had a chance to give it a little bit more thought.
Of course, I would imagine that your performance was kind of a game-changing, performance at that state meet in terms of, whether it be offers and the types of things that, how committed the programs were to pursuing you. Did anyone come from the outside into that competition? You kind of talked about Michigan and Michigan State being the primary two there that you brought up. Were there any other suitors in the process that made that difficult?
Well, I really wanted to go to a Michigan school, and Michigan and Michigan State were pretty much it. I mean, Florida State, I was recruited there also, Corey Van Fleet, and that's a beautiful place down there, nice weather, but it was kind of, I was a kid, I wanted to stay close to home, mom and dad, and so it was really Michigan schools won out on that.
Right. So you talked about, like, you arrive at Michigan State as a swimmer that's expected really from the beginning probably to contend for Big Ten championships, having posted a time that would have won one in 72. Did that add any pressure to you, as you arrived in East Lansing?
No, I don't think so. Coach he never said, you have to do this, you have to do that, other than work us out really hard. And when it did come time for Big Tens, it was a completely different world. when I won the Big Ten that year, came back, we were sitting on the far end of the pool from the starting blocks, and I think everybody was shocked because my performances up to that point weren't spectacular. But when I won, he came back and he said, "Good swim, congratulations," and that was it. Everybody else is kind of, it was very different. There wasn't any, crowd jumping up and, just a roar or anything. It was very sedated.